purpose for our current exhibition YOLK for the Taurisano collection. First in our panel, we have Sveva D'Antonio, who hopefully will be joining us in a second. She's just running a little bit late, who alongside her husband is the brains and the support and the vision behind the Taurisano collection, currently exhibited in YOLK online showcase with Artland, and the reason for this discussion today. To support artists, Sveva has introduced the award recently because of Many Suns, which alongside many initiatives, she works to celebrate and champion artists, both inside and outside of her collection. And I think we all agree she's a true champion of emerging artists and emerging talent. So looking forward to speaking to her later on this afternoon, or this evening for some of us. Next in our panel, we have patron and collector Nish McCree, who alongside building a phenomenal and powerful art collection, Nish works to empower artists globally with a particular focus on emerging African female artists. And I'm really excited to speak to you more, Nish, about yourself and your collecting journey. And we have Georgia and Liza, who both join us from Curates, an LA and London-based company working to support collectors and organisations with the care of their collections. Georgia and Liza are both immense advocates for collectors and artists alike, working tirelessly to support each side of the art world, including initiatives like In the Studio, which we launched together earlier this year to support artists in their studio practice. Georgia specialises in professional management, research and display of collections, and Liza specialises in preservation and collections management. And thank you both for joining me here today again, which is really nice. And I must say before we start that it is a joy and a pleasure and a privilege to be chairing this discussion with an esteemed panel of women in the arts, each of who is a complete professional inspiration and mentor in many ways to me, and also each of you are a dear friend, and so I'm really, really pleased to be here today with all of you. So thank you for joining me, and yeah, hopefully Sveva will be joining in the next sort of few minutes or so. I thought it'd be really fun to kick off the discussion about collecting with a purpose, and perhaps we're discussing each of the collections we have from our patrons here. So Nish, I wondered if we could start by discussing your collection and your collecting journey so far, and how you would describe the purpose behind your collecting style. Big question.
Yes, great. No, thank you, Molly, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's so nice to join you all, and absolutely have loads of love for Cura Art. So it's wonderful to be on this panel with Georgia and Liza, and look forward to welcoming Sveva when she joins us. So to answer your huge, grand question, I will just start by framing a little bit of sort of the premise behind why I started collecting, and maybe even share some insights into the specifics of the collection and what we're trying to do going forward. So I started collecting about almost 9 years ago, and really was interested in focusing on art made in the United States, but mostly by African-American artists. And over time, I would say probably about 3 years in or so, actually that's not totally true, but maybe about 1 year in or so, I started to look towards the African continent and looking at contemporary art made in Africa, and really got sort of hooked into this idea of what it would look like to build a collection around art made in Africa, as well as art made by the African diaspora, even beyond the United States. So to have this sort of wide view of representation of art made by people who are coming from either communities like mine, or communities that I'm familiar with, or cultures that I really respect, or that I find very engaging and inspiring, and to sort of bring that together through the visual arts in one collection. And I say it sort of comprehensively like that, but initially it wasn't so clear to me that that's what I was doing. I think over time collecting, you start to get a lot more intentionality about what it is you're doing. And I would say that intentionality has definitely come more strongly in the last few years towards collecting more women and really balancing out the connection to the collection in that way. So, now what I feel like I'm trying to do, and part of it is because of sort of formalizing my engagement as a patron collector and sort of transitioning that over now, and really putting a lot of emphasis in this idea of supporting the art community and the art ecosystem. So with the collection, what I'm trying to say is, here's one example, here's what I did, but guess what? This is available to many more people. So how are we building local collector bases across the region? I live in Ghana, so I'm looking at starting here at home and spanning that out. And then I'll talk, I think, a little bit more in the future, as we're talking here today in that future, that I'll talk a little bit more about some of the ways I'm formalizing my the collection. And it's my collection with my husband, so I should be really sure to sort of applaud him as well, because he's a part of it and it's really come on in a strong way. But we really are saying, let's preserve the art. Let's be a part of that preservation of art. Let's be a part of championing local collector bases. Let's be a part of championing our art community and artists that we can serve by sharing, mentorship and professional development opportunities. And also let's think about our system and the structure around our ecosystem. And that's institutions, academic centers, cultural centers, museums. Where are we, in this contemporary moment in terms of those individual and structural kind of spaces for contemporary art made at the moment where I am in Ghana and in Africa. So I feel like I said so many things and maybe not very many, but just to distill it down, I find it just to be an exciting moment to be talking about what it means to be a collector who's African-American, but living in an African country. Yeah, I'll stop there.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you for giving us that introduction. I can't wait to hear more. I love how you say how your collection and this need to collect came from a local space and then has had much more breadth to it and then has this purpose. And you talk about women artists, especially this year. And I wondered, Georgia and Liza, in your professional experience, have you seen that across wider collections as well? This kind of narrowing down on a kind of purpose and a reason behind those collections?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what Nish was saying about it not being immediately obvious and it being part of the process, coming to that point, realizing the focus that I should say her and her husband wanted to have with the collection. And I think that's important because it means that there isn't so much pressure on people that are starting to collect. I must be doing a certain thing. I must be focusing on a particular group of artists, or I think people just have to ease into it and find naturally the way that they should be going, if that makes sense. But in terms of your question, Molly, I think it definitely is part of a wider, more conscious approach to collecting. And Nish and I were actually on a panel on that subject earlier this year for Masterpiece that was particularly focused on this new era of collecting with purpose, whether it's underrepresented artists, providing access to collections. There's all these other ways that collectors can act as patrons, and that seems to be the theme. I think it goes with a sort of wider social conscience as well that seems to be happening more broadly, even outside of the arts.
I also think it's interesting what Nish said about preservation, because I think some people might think of preservation as more of an act of actually preserving something. So, maybe talking more about conservation preservation or collections management preservation. But what Nish is talking about is kind of this wider role that a collector has on preserving, this, whether it's an artwork from an artist or just more broadly preserving a type of art. I think that was really interesting, the way you used that word.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry, Nish, were you going to say something? Sorry, I saw you on mute.
No, thanks. I was just going to say, that idea of cultural preservation in a moment where obviously it's iterative, it's happening every day, it's happening all around us. But what's, I think, interesting in this moment, in the global art world, we've had such an interest in, art made in Africa and by the African diaspora. So I think it's important to think about, if you were a collector in this part of the world, then, you know, how are you thinking about preserving that culture and letting it also live where it was sort of originated to a degree. So that's also part of what I mean when I say cultural preservation. Yeah.
I think that's really important. Actually, Molly and I were talking about this today with somebody else. It has to be, when we're talking about purpose, there has to be other things. How do I put it? Democratically, it seems like the art market quite often dictates trends or themes, and a lot of emphasis at the moment, as you say, is on African artists, and there needs to be other work surrounding that. So much education, so much other work. It can't just be about acquisition, and that's what you're working on, which is really interesting, and that's the purpose as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know what, Georgia, you said something so important that has been brought out by, I don't want to botch her name, but I believe it's Sarah Elizabeth Lewis, but I hope I didn't get it mixed up, but I'm pretty sure. Okay, she's at Harvard. She wrote a brilliant piece, might have been late last year or very early on this year, talking about just that idea of how much more we need art criticism, art writing, theory, sort of historical analysis of some of these trends to really make them count in the future art history canon. And so you're absolutely spot on.
I think, Nish, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to speak about some of the things you have upcoming, like your platform, your online platform that's coming up. But it is interesting, as you're saying, that these social trends inform the collections, and it's like, how can then the collections, which are in a lot of ways, like in Sveva's collection, this snapshot of time, how can then re-exhibiting them, you know, bring that emphasis and that highlight that is, as we know, so often forgotten after the event. So Nish, I don't know if you wanted to talk a bit more about all the projects you have upcoming, like us, including your online platform.
Yes, thank you for this great opportunity to talk about the Cowrie culture. I'll just briefly mention that, you know, earlier when I talked about formalizing my interest a bit, earlier this year and coming out of COVID, it really came out of me saying, have I made enough of a commitment that actually matters? What, you know, goes beyond collecting for the sake of collecting, which I'm really not that interested in anymore. I mean, this idea of collecting with a purpose, on purpose, to me makes the most sense, particularly in this time of consumerism and, you know, the way that we are overly sort of committed to acquisition. And so the Cowrie culture really came out of this desire to say, all right, I'm sitting within an art ecosystem. I see opportunities to make a more meaningful contribution from my perspective. And I already talked a little bit about this notion of the individual. So what am I doing to encourage emerging artists? How am I personally, given my, you know, few years of experience and knowledge, sort of helping transfer that over and create some systems that will help even provide those artists with this idea of professional development that may be a little bit harder to access potentially. And I also wanted to address, as I mentioned earlier, the system level issues that I think we have an opportunity to intervene on, those of us who are in this part of the world and the region. And of course, system level issues like how we're looking at art institutions and schools and art centers and museums. I mean, those things are much longer term sort of aspirations in terms of how we might contribute. But I think definitely having an openness to that need and saying, how are we partnering with extraordinary people to help fill some of these gaps and or help create something that feels fresh and necessary even with other people who also want to pitch in and do something. So that's really what birthed the Cowrie culture. And you know, and I have to say, Molly, since we launched in July, which is not that long ago, July of this year, I feel like that was like 5 years ago. But there's so many things that have happened, and we had our first exhibition in Accra in person with a wonderful partner, this mixed design hub, which has just been phenomenal. And it really is an example, Molly, of exactly kind of what I was suggesting. There are other fantastic people out there, really extraordinary, doing some great things in the space. And then so together with, partnering makes it possible to bring some of these bigger ideals into reality and a little bit sooner. I mean, if I had to go out and get a new gallery space and a beautiful one, the way that we had with the mix, I don't know how long that might take. So the counterculture is really about saying, what can we do in this space to strengthen our art ecosystem, to expand and sustain it? And how are we contributing to that? And how are we having fun while we're doing it? Yeah.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing all that with you. And it's so lovely and such a positive look to the future of collecting, to have collectors doing these active initiatives. And I know something Georgia and Liza are really passionate about, and just getting back involved with the artists. Like you say, Georgia, it's not just acquisition, it's about doing something with that. And I think that's really, really exciting. I also have to say, I've just had a message from Svava, and she's unable to join us this evening. So it'll be the four of us this evening, but she sends her apologies, just so everybody's aware. And I wondered, Nish and Georgia and Liza, what you see in collectors in general, in when you're collecting with a purpose, what is it that first draws you to a piece? Is it that realization that it fits in kind of the parameters of your collection? Is it through research? Is it from art advisors who know your collection and your kind of values? How do you find those artists that you're going to be collecting? And Georgia and Liza, how are you seeing people find those artists that they're acquiring their works?
Well, Nish, do you want to start with this one?
Oh, please go ahead, Georgia.
Are you sure?
I'm happy to come back in. Yes.
Okay. How are we seeing people finding artists? I feel like it's shifted, and I feel like the art world, especially in the last couple of years, has been made even more accessible because of the nature of what's been going on, and people are finding artists in new ways. The ArtNet intelligence report recently said that some artists are being found more frequently on Instagram than in grad shows or art fairs. And I feel like that accessibility to the art world, literally in the palm of your hand, has changed things. I still think that research is key, and that having a well-trusted art advisor who really aligns with your values is beneficial. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Liz.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think especially in the last few years when everything's gone digital, the way that this fast-paced auction room kind of way of looking at the art world has changed, with art fairs going online and people having access to big fairs like Basel and Frieze all over the world, that we can all be in this virtual space together. And I think that's a real positive from this time, just creating access. And it's something that Georgia and I are really passionate about, is just having these things be accessible. And I definitely think that there's a time and a place for a trusted advisor. And I know in both London and Los Angeles, where we're based, we work with some wonderful advisors who are, that is their expertise, and their skill set is finding artists, but also creating these really long lasting relationships with artists that sometimes collectors have directly with the artists. But I do think that shouldn't be overlooked, as having those trusted relationships with experts in the field.
Nish, have you found the way that you're approaching finding artists changed over lockdown? Because I am the same as all of you. The amount of online studio visits I've done has been an absolute blessing, to be honest. I've loved it, not being a Londoner myself. Have you found that, Nish?
Yeah, I have. And, similarly, that intelligence report, Georgia, highlighted that this headline, like the new face of collecting, or the new, and what I really want to bring out is that of that report is that the idea of the way collectors are kind of demystifying the process of engagement, direct engagement with artists. And COVID, I think, forced our hands with that. Even, I mean, I was sort of already before really sort of trying to connect with the artist directly. And I think part of that is because the kind of art that I collect, a lot of it really is, I mean, it's quite young artists, you know, very much emerging. Even the experienced, you know, artists that I've collected are still probably younger than I am. So it's one of those things where, you know, you over time, you know, because of the trust and relationships, you end up really having quite a direct connection to the artist. But, you know, certainly the last year, I think, made more people feel bold about their engagement and just stepping up, not only the way they find art and look at art, but really saying, okay, what am I doing with this collection? What does it really mean? You know, how are other people going to experience it? You know, and it's moving towards that notion, Georgia, of that we had in the earlier panel this year of, you know, engagement beyond your collection just at your home. Like, how is it spiraling out? What does it mean? Yeah, I haven't answered your question, but absolutely it's changed. I mean, Instagram is, you know, people make jokes about Instagram, but I mean, this painting behind me, I originally got connected with this artist through Instagram, and he's gone on to do incredible things, you know, over the last few years. So there is a role. I think for me, I would love to maybe think about an art advisor in the future when I'm going towards more modern African art, which is something I also love. I don't really talk about it very much, but it really requires a level of expertise that I just don't have. So I think as we become more specific, it's nice to have that art advisor.
I think I know that obviously my career, especially in recent years, has been pushed by Instagram, and like you say, people joke about it, but it was I know George and Liza wrote recently that quote that said that Instagram is the biggest art dealer in the world, and Nish, the image behind you is proof of that. And I know I have lots of work that I bought through Artist Support Pledge and these kind of things where artists really took back a lot of power during lockdown, and it was really nice to see, because it could have hit them really hard, and I think for a lot of them they actually thrived, which was obviously fantastic and changed those dynamics in the art world. I'm not sure if we can talk about social media and online presences without talking about this shift towards NFTs and digital art and that side of it, which I am not an expert in at all. Georgia and I actually did talk during Freeze with an artist called Sue Gwen, who's at the forefront of NFT art in such an interesting, exciting way. What are your three collective opinions? This is another big question about NFTs and that shift towards digital artwork. I know it's very divisive because I thought the trajectory for them looked super positive and there were all these exciting spaces. And very recently, I felt like there's been this move towards almost ridicule of them through memes. I don't know what you guys think and if you've seen a sort of similar underbelly to
them. I think we're all gonna have to embrace them. It feels like that's the way it's going. I know we spoke about this in our talk that you referred to, Molly, during Freeze. From the perspective of what Liza and I do, it adds a whole other dimension. Like, how do you catalog, preserve an NFT? We went into that in detail about, you know, the way that it's hosted and all of these things. So it adds another dimension from just a purely managing your collection aspect, but also display. And the artist that we spoke to had come up with a really interesting concept that the NFT had a location. So it could be moved around the house, and as soon as a guest leaves the house, they can no longer see it. So it was mind-blowing. And also she could change the NFT retrospectively, which I didn't even know. I thought it was in blockchain, and that was that once it'd been created. So personally, I find the whole concept slightly overwhelming at this stage. But I feel like we all have to get educated on the subject. I also think, just given the context of what's happening in Glasgow right now, I feel like more broadly, NFTs has brought up the subject of the use of energy and climate change in the art world, which the fact that it's brought that to people's attention because of the huge amount of energy that it takes to create them. But on the positive side, going back to the power concept and more power in the hands of artists, it does make the creation of art, and this is something we spoke about with Sue Gwen, much more accessible. So there's lots of positives and negatives as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
I don't really have anything to add. I'm also to find it quite overwhelming, but I think like what Georgia said, from a purely, hands-on management aspect, I've been having some early conversations with collectors about this. And, we do deal with collections that have a lot of video installation, and even something like a James Turrell installation that's in someone's home, and then that person goes to sell the home, and then what happens to that piece? These themes of that kind of surround an NFT have long been established. I think it's just that the really high-end technology that goes into creating these things, it just brings in this whole other element that I'm definitely still educating myself about, and learning something new all the time. I think Artsy came out with a report just this morning. I didn't even read the full article, but I think it also was saying we're kind of, again, back to this. I think it was definitely below 15% of artists creating NFTs are women. So again, we're in this conversation about that as well. So,
Absolutely. And like you say, these are sort of recycled conversations and these statistics that aren't that different from the physical world. And it's quite, especially talking about collecting with a purpose, it's very sort of disheartening in some ways, but I feel positive. But it's like even these new landscapes that we're literally creating right now, I don't think people are thinking enough, or not doing enough perhaps, about realizing what we want those landscapes to look like. And we want them to be different. This is what we're all here for. And it's the conversation everyone keeps having. And I wonder how we can really push to have that equal representation. It's like, why shouldn't it be? It was only launched, they're not old. There shouldn't be this backlog of history to them, but there is, because it's the art world, unfortunately.
It's also worth pointing out that something that came up during our talk with Sue Gwen is that NFTs are actually bringing new people to collecting, a whole new audience. And there's that shift as well.
Absolutely. She was saying that people that were interested in technology and these different fields are now coming into the art world, which is a really exciting shift, really, really exciting shift. Absolutely. So speaking of NFTs in this way that we're presenting work, and obviously we're here surrounding YOLK, the online exhibition. Liza, what you were saying about the impossible artworks and things like video art, the Taurisano collection is actually full of them, and so many of them we wanted to include in the online space, but obviously because of the sort of capabilities of online space even now, can be quite difficult. But hopefully in the exhibition we do in Italy next year, the physical one, we're going to be introducing lots more of them. But how important do you believe it is for collectors to be displaying their artwork and to be showing it? I know we touched on this briefly earlier around the importance of showing that snapshot in time and the importance of it, but Nish, do you have plans to share your collection, do you think, going forward?
I'd love to share it, but I don't have any plans at the moment. We haven't really gotten that call, but we're certainly open to sharing some parts of the collection. Some of it, yes, is not with us in Ghana for certain reasons, but we're really open to sharing it, and also open to exploring more NFTs, particularly through photography. So one of the, things that, on the continent, we have more people, I've forgotten the statistic, but at one point it was something like we have more people on the continent of Africa with a smartphone than with like a toilet. I mean, it's really incredible the amount that the saturation of, cell phones and mobile phones, maybe not smart, so let me take off the smart, but like mobiles for certain, and even our financial mobile platforms topped in-person physical transactions for the first time this year. So I'm saying all that to suggest that, I can see how emerging artists in this part of the world, particularly those that are interested in photography, could make that transition to NFTs and sort of minting their own NFTs and getting support for the gas fees and all the things that it takes to get onto a platform. We've even had conversations. I've had some conversations lately with a colleague here in Accra who is trying to stand up the first, he's calling it the first Africa-based NFT marketplace. So people are really getting engaged in that space and saying, how can we interact? I mean, there's some system level obstacles. Some things with like setting up a wallet and things like that are not as easy in this part of the world. But I do think it's something we cannot afford to ignore. I mean, people can be snippy about it, but I think for us, particularly what you said about women in the space, let's just go ahead and embrace it and try and see how then we can get a little bit ahead of the industry, which is sort of lagging, and position ourselves to be more innovating and resourceful for the audiences that we really want to serve. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we all echo that, just embracement and just learning about it. I know a question Sveva had as part of the sort of roundtable discussion was just about the importance of then educating the next series of collectors, and with the art world moving so quickly, I wonder how long it will be till they start educating about NFTs in art school and everything around that. And in preservation school, and Liza, all the courses that you must have done, how to preserve your NFTs, which boggles me.
It same. So I'll take another course when that one is offered. Yeah, I'll sign up.
Well, the NFT advocates are like, you people collecting your real paper paintings and canvas things, don't you realize, like, in a matter of time, no one's going to collect anything. We're not even going to have real money. We're all just going to be completely digitized. So that's the argument they're making, that we are like these dinosaurs in our mindset around the collection of things and sharing it. As you mentioned in the question, how will you show it? I mean, I think in the future, certainly it'd be much easier for me to share 20 NFTs versus getting 20 pieces, even 20 pieces of artwork to wherever else in the world from Accra. You know what I mean? So I think we should try our best to get up to speed and try and sort of stay up to speed, because it changes so quickly. But to maybe be advocates, I hate to go that far, but maybe in a way we should consider being advocates for this kind of art, because I think it opens up the practice of art to more people who don't have all the things it takes to be, let's say, a traditional artist. Yeah. So it's just food for thought.
I think you're right. I think you're right completely. And I remember, not to keep going back to it, but in the discussion George and I had with Su Gwen Chung, one of the questions we had was, do you think it threatens traditional collecting? And I think we sort of came to the answer that in the same way that a Kindle threatens a book, we were like, we don't think it does, and we think they can grow in a kind of synergy together. And I think Nish, you're right. I think it's exciting, and I think especially if we can push it in the right direction, I think it's really, really exciting. I wondered, and this is a question for all of you, I know Sveva had lots of artists to talk about, if there are any artists that the three of you have your eye on, and I know we can tag these in the sort of, caption afterwards to give them a shout out, because it's always nice. Yeah, who are you guys watching at the moment?
feel like maybe Nish should go first. That's hard.
Me too.
You said you want me to go first? Okay, you know what? I'm just getting her proper last name, and then I love her so much. Her name is Larissa. Okay, Larissa, where are you? And again, I'm consulting my good consultant here on Instagram. But she is fantastic. Yes, okay, I just wanted to get her last name correctly. So it's Larissa de Souza. She's from Brazil, and I think she's incredible. I really believe in what she's doing, and I'm watching her very closely and with excitement. And yes.
I'm now frantically looking her up.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
She actually was shown at Freeze, Georgia, and well, all of you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she was shown at Freeze. What is it? Cromwell Place, the gallery, her gallery. Mahua showed, I think, one or two of her pieces there. And I'm really excited about what she's doing.
I find it really interesting what Mollie was saying about the Kindle book connection, because it feels like, and I know there's lots of discussion surrounding this at the moment, especially in London, because there was the Hayward Gallery exhibition, and maybe it's still on, about I was kind of return to painting. Seems like lots that people are turning back to painting, and actually figurative painting as well. And I don't really know why, but that's what I'm always drawn to. So I love the work of Michaela Yearwood-Dan, who's currently at residency in Palazzo Monti. Is that how you say it, Mollie?
Yes, yeah, and at the Royal Academy.
Yeah, she's currently in the summer exhibition. We saw her work together. I just love that kind of ethereal. Who else?
Amy Beeger.
Yeah, I love Amy Beeger.
Whole conversation.
Yeah, I'm just very excited about this return to the tactility of painting. That's what there's something about standing in front of a painting, I have no idea why, that it particularly excites me. So yeah, I will think, maybe Liza, have you got, actually an LA based artist that Liza and I both love, Camilla Engstrom. Yeah.
I also think kind of, because Georgia and I have a slightly different view on all of these artists that we're connecting with, whether it's through collectors, even sometimes I contact an artist studio because of a conservation issue. And then you have a whole different conversation with an artist about their process and how we can work together to maybe repair an artwork. But because you have this slightly different vantage point, and I think it goes back to what you've been talking about, Mollie, about kind of how the relationship changes when you acquire something, when you already know the artist. And I think it's been really interesting for Georgia and I to kind of see some of these artists' work change really drastically over the last 2 or 3 years, where maybe we did a studio visit and then we did a project with them, and then 3 years later we do another studio visit, and it's really, it gives me goosebumps. It's so exciting just to see an artist evolve and change and work on their craft. And I think, if I was going to go and buy something tomorrow, I've been spending a lot of time with her, so I think I'm kind of biased right now, but I would probably go and get a Tawny Lonsdale, who's an artist based in Los Angeles. And I think because I've got to know her as a person too, it just changes your whole outlook on the work. And I think it's a really, it makes it really meaningful. So, yeah.
Liz, you just reminded me, I don't really know why it reminded me of this, but the exhibition we saw together, the exhibition that has had the most profound effect on me this year was the Michael Armitage show at the Royal Academy. His paintings, just standing in front of them. I guess because we've been locked inside for 18 months, it was even more poignant. but there's something that he does with the gestural brushstrokes. So it was just incredible. And I thought it was amazing that he used a whole room to showcase other artists. I thought that was really interesting and rare that an artist would do that.
The only other exhibition I've had that feeling, which was kind of the exhibition that really stood out to me in Los Angeles, was the most recent retrospective of Lorna Simpson, which is at Hauser and Wirth right now. And again, like Georgia said, these huge paintings. I mean, I've been back multiple times. Every time I'm in the area, I go. So that's like dreamland for me to own one of hers. But Molly, you can start a list for us based on this conversation, and we'll work our way through.
And while we're on the topic, we should actually say that I find She Curates, the platform, so useful for, I've just learned about so many artists through your amazing platform, Molly. So just putting that out there.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, She Curates is just fantastic. Also find a Black history of art.
Yes.
Amazing. Yes.
She's wonderful. She was on our podcast. Yeah.
Yes. So insightful and just, really so well done. It's like, oh my gosh, I mean, the time that it takes, I just really appreciate everything that you're doing, Molly, with She Curates, and also, all these platforms that are just, they're almost like aggregators, but like highly curated to bring the best. Yeah, it really is some of the best and truly first looks in a lot of ways, which I think speaks volumes about just like the eye that like you have, Molly, and in some of these people, it's just so impressive, which again makes the way we find art and buy art look a little bit different. I mean, when you get these trusted, resources, it sort of time after time proves itself, then you really think, I mean, I would trust that as much as, an art advisor. I mean, I know that's like maybe a bold statement, but some of these resources are just incredible. Yeah.
That's really, really kind and generous of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Made my evening. We can turn off the webinar now. Thank you very much. It completely informs with the exhibitions that I'm doing. Instagram completely informs the artists I involve, the curation of them, and then, YOLK was sort of started. I met Sveva through Georgia and Liza, but Sveva actually purchased Amanda Barr's work from an exhibition I did back in May, which is now exhibited inside of YOLK, which is a really cool sort of cyclical narrative to it and story to it. So it's interesting. And I discovered her work with Daniel, who ran the gallery, through Instagram. So it's all informed through that. And here we go with an online exhibition. And not only artists through Instagram, I've also got some questions through Instagram from people when I did a call out for this talk. But I wondered if you three had questions for each other at all as a kind of round table. I know we discussed briefly via email. We've covered quite a lot here.
I have a question for Nish that I've kind of been coming across quite frequently. Do you feel comfortable purchasing a work without seeing it in person first? So seeing it virtually?
Yes, I do that all the time. I mean, even before the pandemic, it's just, I think part of it is just the nature of where I live. And, if you want to work by someone who lives in Brazil or even the United States, you just got to trust that virtual exchange and that virtual visit. And again, I think over time, just your personal preference and even feeling like you trust your own eye and sense of your taste and preferences and thinking about how something fits into the larger collection. So I do it all the time, Liza. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't, but I really do. I'm so far beyond having any reservation about it. Yeah.
But it seems like that's been the trend. I mean, the auction houses that I've been speaking to in London, people have been purchasing works throughout the pandemic unseen. But it seems like your approach would be slightly different. I'm sure there's still an interaction with the artist. Yeah. And
there is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is that interaction with the artist for sure. Like you said, Liza, you get to sort of build a sort of a budding relationship. And there really only been like, not very many times where I got something and thought, oh no, this is really different than what I imagined. But I tell you, yeah, like 90% of the time, I feel very pleased to have made that purchase, even though, I didn't physically see it initially. Yeah.
Were there any other questions, or should I go across to the Instagram questions?
I have a question about, go ahead, Georgia.
No, go for it.
No, I have a question about, I think, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of the role of the collector or the patron or the art mentors around sharing the idea with artists that, artists as entrepreneur, how much do we have as a responsibility or a role to help emerging artists to understand the business side of being an artist? And I know, maybe Kira, I'm not sure if you're going into that direction so much, but Mollie, is that something that you've maybe thought about?
I think definitely. I think with this kind of not emerging, because they've always been there, but collectors and patrons that have come to the forefront for being such genuine supporters of artists, like, and we said before, not just acquiring the work but having this relationship. I think it's a discussion that lots of people are having, and I think the discussions I've had recently with Millie from Gillian Jason Gallery and Ellie from Gillian Jason Gallery, Daniel from Daniel Raphael Gallery, everyone's having these discussions and they're not acting on a whim. They're really working for the right thing for the artist. And I think these discussions that galleries, importantly, and again, Gillian Jason Gallery does this a lot, has with artists even before they start representing them. And it's saying that, this is your career, this is your business, you have to be making money and you've got to be making the right steps to get to where you want to be. And I think there's definitely a responsibility, a really conscious responsibility, and I think that's only growing. And I think artists, like we say, they've got a lot of the power back. We've got to be helping them, and I think it's so important those conversations are being had, and then initiatives from collectors, patrons, galleries, curators, everything are being made for those right steps for the artists. So yeah.
Mollie, I'm having a mind blank. What was the book that came out last year aimed at artists?
How to Be an Artist by Delphi.
Yes, Delphian Gallery. Yes, sorry. So it does seem, the fact that a big London gallery is publishing a book specifically aimed at artists about how to be an artist does feel like there's a shift and an acknowledgement from galleries, advisors, etc., that there has to be this power shift, because the dynamic has changed. Things like Instagram and artist websites means that people can go directly to an artist now. So I think galleries are just realizing the position of that and how it affects everything. And I forgot what I was going to say.
You're so right. And artists now, you speak to them and they're managing different conversations with different galleries, and like not pitch them against each other, but saying like, which is the best move for me in my career. And it's so important because we need to be held accountable. And I think galleries are working to do better, which is obviously exactly what we want to see.
But there's so much surrounding, as well as the sort of business side of it. So promoting and selling your work. There's so much other educational elements. We have, as Mollie said at the beginning, realized that some of the services that we offer to collectors are also relevant to artists. And so have, with Mollie and the artist office in LA, launched in the studio, which is specifically aimed at artists, but with a focus on collector relationships. So more often than not, the artists that we're speaking to don't have a relationship or even are told the information of the person that's collected their work. So lots to be done. an awful lot to be done from everybody involved, connecting the artist with their patron, because the impact of that is huge. The role that a patron could have in promoting an artist's work, and just allowing the artist to ask questions and of the collector. Just for instance, an example, we were speaking to an artist whose work was on display at an institution, and Liza and I said, is there a label there to clearly signify it's your work, or a way for someone to contact you? Oh no, I hadn't thought of that. So it's a wider thing of educating artists to understand that they can ask questions, and they do have power to think like that.
And asking for more. I mean,
Yeah.
I think really, and I think Georgia is spot on. I think really encouraging artists that they can ask for more, and that's okay, and vice versa too. I think some of the education comes from talking to collectors about how they can help artists, and sometimes it's not as clear and straightforward, and it just they might really want to help an artist that they're collecting, but they don't really know something tangible that they can help with. And I think that's something that Georgia and I at Cura are really passionate about, is just this kind of full circle ecosystem where there can be more support and education around what can be done.
Oh, I'm glad to know that. I didn't realize you had that those services at Cura. I sort of got in my mind that it was more the preservation, the cataloging, and the archiving. But maybe I should ask you other questions at another time to get to know all the services that Cura, provides. It's really, really helpful.
Oh, sorry, it's Georgia. I thought you were going to say something because you're unmuted. We have a few questions from the call out that we did on Instagram. It's actually the last one, but I think it's one we should start with because it's a very big question, is why should we be collecting? And what are the reasons behind the need to collect? Which is a huge question. And I think we've answered quite a lot of it in terms of working for a purpose and working to support those artists, but I don't know if you had any other answers to that very broad question.
Oh, it's a big one. I mean, I think also just going back quickly to what Nish started with about preservation. I think it's a very short answer to a very big question, but I mean, I know Georgia studied art history, but it's still, we are still preserving these things throughout history and making them available for the future and really creating a legacy, whether it's for NFTs or traditional art. We're all kind of working towards preserving these things, these pieces, and a time that we're in right now as well.
Yeah, I think it's a huge question. I think there's a difference between why people collect and why should people collect. Interesting that they framed it, why should people collect? Because people have collected things for a whole manner of reasons throughout our existence, which I find fascinating. And there is a brilliant TED talk that links collecting, why people collect, to a very animal instinct, and that it's part of our brain, that you collect things, whether it's shells when you go to the beach, you feel like you need something to signify a memento. There's obviously lots of reasons, status, to surround ourselves with beautiful things or things that have sentiment, but why should people collect? That's an interesting one. And I think very purely, it should be to encourage and support artists, to put it really basically. That's basically why people should collect, to encourage and support creativity.
Yeah, I think you're all absolutely spot on. And I would just add, again, beyond like the purest reasons, right, for the love of it and all the good things, I think, and particularly, again, I feel like I keep bringing it back to this, to the continent of Africa, but because I think it's such a great opportunity that we have at this moment, where the creative economy is just a multi-billion-dollar sector. And if you think about, you know, art, contemporary art, and even breaking that down into like other creative models, fashion, music, food culture, cultural tourism, and all those things that sort of come under the bucket of cultural tourism, under creative economy, sorry. I think you could make a case that one should collect art, particularly here in this part of the world, because it would represent a completely new stream of revenue for a lot of domestic economies within the continent of Africa. And I feel like I said this on our talk before, Georgia. I just believe it so strongly that it is an avenue for helping young people who are, you know, a continent of young people who happen to be artists or creatives, actually become entrepreneurs and to thrive and to take care of themselves and to see, you know, that contribute even to GDPs. I think for me, that's a really huge why that I think makes sense. On top of the other purist sort of rational, you know, approaches like we love it, creativity should be a part of how we live, and yeah. But from a practical side, I think it's a way to contribute to economic growth and social development. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think this is a nice question to end on. Is what are your top tips for a budding collector to start their collection? I don't know if you each want to give like one tip or something. I think that's a nice question to end on.
Ooh, another big question. I mean, I think Georgia and I say this a lot, but I think when you're starting out, really to figure out what you like. You know, I think collecting should start with not what the trends are, not what you should be doing, but also if you're going to start buying, you know, say you're buying your first piece of art, what do you like? What are you intrigued by? What are you passionate about? I think just kind of focusing on those things first is really important, and will start your collection with the right kind of, you know, you want to be living with something that you're really passionate about and that you like. I think that's important.
And I think on that subject, I think even before you start, or even if you have purchased a few works with intention, like Liza says, I think research and just informing yourself. I remember having a conversation with Valeria Napoleone, and she said, I literally just spent 2 years visiting exhibitions, going to galleries, getting myself informed, and have fun with it. It doesn't need to be, I feel like a lot of things in the art world are very intimidating, but just enjoy the process. And as Nish said, you don't need to be knowing exactly what your focus will be from the very beginning. Just allow yourself to enjoy the process. Yeah, that's basically what I would suggest.
All the great answers taken. I will just simply say, I never said this one before, but I would say, don't be afraid to make a mistake, and be willing to be a bit experimental in the process, which really goes to everything you all have said. Research, look at a lot of art every day, you know, read, meet artists, find great platforms like Curates and Curated and others that we love, and go to galleries if you have access to them, museums if you do, but really realize, I mean, it's okay, you know, you're not going to make a mistake if initially you love that thing you bought, and that 5 years later when you've learned a ton more and you go, oh my goodness, I might not have bought that thing for, you know, whatever it was. But at the moment you loved it and it brought you joy and it was great. So I think embrace the creativity of it, embrace the experimentation. Yeah.
And just in pure contrast to that lovely sentiment, and from a very practical point of view, always keep paperwork. That's what Liza and I would suggest. Invoices, anything when purchasing work of art, keep the paperwork.
Digitize, but that's a whole other conversation. Keep your paperwork, back up your paperwork.
Very important.
I love that. Thank you all so much for joining this talk today. This has been so interesting. And it's just been lovely to speak to all of you. Like I say, absolute inspirations to me and good friends. So thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Mollie, Georgia, Liza. Thank you.
Thank you, Nish.